I went to Gantry 9 for a fuel injector, not a person, and I want that on the record. The Corvath Exchange runs auctions the way other stations run laundromats. Cheap, loud, nobody asking where the goods came from. I docked the Marlow Hollis there for parts twice before. Always the same routine. Walk the stalls, haggle over salvage, leave before the specialty lots came up. That day I cut through the wrong aisle chasing a coolant line, and that's how I ended up standing in front of a cage. She was sitting the way you sit when you've stopped expecting the sitting to end. Knees drawn up, back straight anyway. Some habits don't leave a person even when everything else has been stripped off them. Her skin held a faint moss-green glow along thin veins beneath the surface. Black hair cropped short and uneven, like it had been cut with a tool that wasn't meant for hair. A metal collar sat close around her throat, a tag hanging off it in the flat block print, the concern used for livestock and machine parts alike. Specimen 6114K. Regenerative secretion, grade A. Nonverbal under restraint. Nonverbal under restraint. That's a fancy way of saying the collar was cutting her voice off at the throat. Her eyes came up and found mine, and there wasn't pleading in them. That surprised me. A captive audience usually works an angle, tries the wet eyes on whoever walks by. She didn't. She looked at me the way you look at one more stranger, walking past a cage you've been in long enough to stop hoping about. Amber eyes, pale as weak tea, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I kept walking. Got 20 feet before I stopped. The auctioneer was a Vantor broker named Osley, thin as a wire and twice as sharp, working the crowd with the easy patter of a man who'd sold 100 of these and would sell 100 more. Grade A secretion, gentlemen. Closes third-degree burns in under an hour. No scarring. The Ilvain don't grow on trees, and this one's young, which means decades of yield left in her. He rapped a knuckle on the bars like testing a crate for rot. Opening bid, 5,000. Somebody laughed and said they'd take her home for that. Osley laughed along like it was good for business. I stood there longer than I should have, watching the bidding climb in flat, bored voices. 8, 9, 11,000. Men pricing out a woman's blood the way you'd price a spare hull plate. None of this was my business. But I kept thinking about her eyes finding mine and moving on without asking me for anything at all. I raised my hand at 15,000. I didn't decide to. My arm just went up. Osley's grin widened. Fresh blood. 15 from the gentleman in the work jacket. Do I hear 16? Somebody said 16. I said 20. The room went quieter. That particular quiet a crowd gets when the math stops making sense. 20,000 credits was most of what I had. Every bit of it meant for a new drive coil I'd been saving toward for 8 months. I felt Osley's eyes cut toward me, reassessing. Not a rival bidder, a problem. 20, he said slowly. That's a serious number for a working man's coin, friend. You certain? Dead certain, I said. In the cage, she'd gone still. Not the resigned stillness from before. Watchful. Now, like she was working out what kind of trap I might be. In her experience, a man who paid attention was a man about to disappoint her in some new way. Someone in the back called 22. My jaw tightened and I said 25, my voice steadier than I felt. Money, I flat out didn't have, not without selling the coil contract and half my spare parts inventory besides. Osley looked at me a long moment, then shrugged, the shrug of a man for whom money is money regardless of source. 25, going once. I'll clear it with the exchange bank inside the hour, I said. You know my registry. The Marlow Hollis has never bounced a bid. That much was true, and it bought me the room. Nobody else raised. Osley brought his hand down and called it, and just like that I owned a person. A sentence that sat in my chest like a swallowed stone the second the gavel chime sounded. I walked up to the cage while the clerk ran my credit chain, and I crouched down so we were eye level, instead of me looming over her like one more owner come to collect. I'm not taking you anywhere, I said. Quiet, so it was between the two of us and not the yard. I bid on you to end the auction. That's all this was. She didn't answer. Couldn't, with the collar shut. But something moved behind her eyes. Not hope exactly. Hope had probably worn a groove too deep to trust anymore. Something closer to a held breath. The clerk brought the release key with my paperwork. the little brass fob that transferred ownership of specimen 6114K into my name. I signed for it. Then, with the whole yard still watching, still expecting me to march my new property off toward the docking ring, like every other buyer that day, I reached through the bars and set the fob flat in her palm instead of my own pocket. "That's yours," I said. "Not mine. You keep it. You use it. You walk out of here whenever you want." I heard Osley make a small, disgusted noise behind me, the sound of a man watching product get devalued in real time. I didn't care. I found the collar's release catch, a concerned standard lock, the same kind I'd cut off crates of stolen freight over the years, and worked it loose with the multi-tool off my belt while she held very still, watching my hands like she still expected them to close around her throat instead. The collar came apart with a small click, and I set it on the cage floor between us, tag side down, so nobody would have to read specimen off it again. She worked her jaw once, twice, testing a voice that hadn't been let out in longer than I wanted to think about. "Why?" she said. Just the one word, rough at the edges, but hers. "Because that tag was wrong," I said. "You're not a grade or a yield. Nobody gets to price you like a spare part and call it business, not while I'm standing here with the coin to stop it." Somewhere behind me, the clerk had stopped calling the next lot. The yard had gone quiet in a way I hadn't heard before. Not bored quiet, not haggling quiet, watching quiet. I didn't turn around to check. It didn't matter to me right then. "You paid $25,000, she said, "to tell a concerned broker his merchandise isn't for sale." "Looks that way. You don't know me." "No," I agreed. "But I know what that caller said about you, and I know it was a lie, and I've got eyes enough to see the rest for myself, given time." She was quiet a long moment, turning the little brass fob over like she was checking it was real. Then she looked past me, at the open cage door, at the aisle running out toward the docking ring, and whatever direction she chose to walk. Nobody moved to stop her. Even Osley had gone still, arms folded, watching to see how his morning's business would end. She stepped out of the cage on her own feet, slow, like she was relearning the size of a room that wasn't barred. Then she stood beside me instead of walking away, and didn't move again. "The Marlow Hollis," she said. "Is that the ship, or the man?" "Ship," I said. "Man's just Dean." "Dean," she said, testing that too, the way she'd tested her own voice. "I am Sarah. Velithake Core, if the whole of it matters to anyone here. It hasn't, in some time." "It matters to me," I said, and meant it plainly, the way I meant most things. Somewhere in the crowd the clerk finally cleared his throat and called the next lot in a voice gone smaller than before. Nobody was looking at the next lot. They were looking at the two of us, at the empty cage with its collar face down on the floor, and at Sarah standing free on her own 2 feet, a hand not quite touching my sleeve, like she was still deciding whether touching things was allowed to be safe again. I didn't have a coil contract left, or a fuel injector, or much more than 400 credits to my name, and a ship I now owed money on. I've never once regretted the trade. She came aboard the Marlow Hollis that evening under her own power, through her own choosing, and when I asked her where she wanted taking, she said she hadn't decided yet, and would I mind if she took a little time working that out from the co-pilot's seat, instead of the cargo hold. I told her the seat had her name on it now, if she wanted it. She said that was the first thing anyone had given her in 3 years, that didn't come with a price tag attached. I said that was the only kind of thing worth giving. She looked at me a long while after that, eyes steady, wet at the edges but not spilling over, the look of someone doing arithmetic on a debt she'd been told her whole life she owed, and finding, for the first time, that the number came out to nothing at all. We left Gantry 9 on the evening tide, coil contract or no coil contract, and I never did go back for that injector.